Hello, friends, and welcome to this episode of SelfKind. I am Erica Webb, your host. I am a registered counsellor, a somatic exercise coach, and yoga teacher, and a highly sensitive person. And today I want to talk about a question that came through over on Instagram when I asked, what would you like to hear on the podcast? And this was a question around, is it me or is it them? Specifically around how can I tell when someone is actually disrespecting me as opposed to me being too sensitive? So I think this is a great question, and it actually took me a little while to formulate my response because I was like, oh, this is a juicy one. We could go in lots of directions. So I have made quite a lot of notes. If you're watching on video, you'll see me look down a little bit because I wanted to keep my thoughts in order. But I think this is a great question. Am I being disrespected or am I just too sensitive? And how can I tell, right? So I want to start this with a couple of observations that kind of set up some framework for what's coming next. And the first thing I want to point out is that many of us have grown up in cultures where there's kind of just a way of being a little insensitive, a little disrespectful that is often dismissed as being funny. So I definitely grew up in a culture like that. I am Australian and we definitely have had that be a part of the culture. And growing up, I remember finding that very confusing. I was often feeling like I was being picked on or people were being rude to me. And then I would be told, what are you talking about? That's just how we talk to each other. That's just how it is. And I would find that incredibly confusing. And so in that kind of context, we might learn how to hide our reactions, laugh it off even when we're hurt on the inside, and feel like it's us that's a problem. When I look back at some of the things that I found offensive or disrespectful or even just outright mean, I can see now through a different kind of adult lens that often they just were, right? They just were disrespectful. They just were mean. And this way that people had of saying lighten up, it's just not a big deal, was really it wasn't great. And so I want to start with that point. I think there's a very fine line, and a line does exist, but I think there is a fine line between this notion of joking around or using somebody else's sensitivity to dismiss your crappy behavior, right? So I want to just point out that before we start. So where does this leave us when we're navigating the question of, am I being too sensitive? Or am I just being sensitive and that's why I feel this way? So maybe not even too sensitive, but is it my sensitivity that's the issue here? Or is this person simply being disrespectful? And I want to offer up perspectives from a couple of different angles. We will talk about how your sensitivity can make it difficult to potentially identify disrespect. And I also want to talk a little bit about sort of situations where, maybe your sensitivity is the thing that is amplifying something that maybe you've misinterpreted. So I think that there are elements of both that are worth talking about, because there are situations, and I've certainly been in situations where I have misunderstood the situation or misunderstood somebody's intentions because of the state that I was in. I was already overstimulated, overwhelmed, and misread because of that. So we are going to talk about that as well. But let's start with the other part. So the first most important part of this discussion is that how you feel is how you feel. Full stop. Other people do not have to agree with how you feel in order for how you feel to be true. How you feel is how you feel, right? What surrounds that is different, but how you feel is how you feel. And as a sensitive person, I absolutely have crowdsourced opinions for is it okay that I feel this way? And people will give you their opinions. And so there's a chance that, like me, you've also experienced this phenomenon where people say, you shouldn't feel like that. I don't feel like that. They might say things like, there's nothing to be scared of. There's nothing to be worried about. you're making a big deal out of it. And so how you feel becomes this big question mark of like, is that okay? Am I wrong? Maybe this isn't right. So I want to start with this premise of regardless of what surrounds how you feel is how you feel. Okay. As a sensitive person, you can probably relate to this, but I've often gone out of my way to protect other people's feelings. That often has looked like saying yes when I mean no. Yes, sure, I'll do that thing that you've asked for because I really don't want to disappoint you. Or saying no when I mean yes, because I'm nervous or scared. And oftentimes it really is around protecting somebody else's emotions, protecting somebody else's experiences. Now, I have done another podcast episode about this and how that's kind of a bit of a false notion, because what we're actually trying to do when we people please like that is protect ourselves from the discomfort of thinking we've let someone down. A little bit of a different conversation, but I'll link that episode in the show notes. But we are probably very familiar with this idea of trying to protect other people's feelings, protect other people's emotions. And so I think that when you do this enough times, when you dismiss your feelings, your needs for the benefit of somebody else, or what you think is the benefit of somebody else, then it might get in the way of your ability to identify when somebody is being disrespectful or unkind, because your feelings haven't been the priority anyway. And so it can be difficult to identify what is actually happening here. The other way that this can go, and I have protected myself in a lot of these sorts of scenarios, is where I don't want to get into a disagreement. I don't want to start a fight. I don't want conflict. And so I will just not say anything, even if I'm pretty confident that that person is being unkind or disrespectful. I think I've gotten better at that as I've gotten older. I know I've gotten better at that as I've gotten older, but that was definitely something I would have avoided in my younger years. And so that pattern too, right, can make it trickier to identify patterns that we want to break, because it feels so uncomfortable to consider that we might do things in a different way. We might have to call somebody out. We might have to create what we sort of feel like is creating conflict, even though in that scenario, you're probably not the conflict creator, you're just calling it out. And so instead of, I guess, having an impact on that relationship, you hold all of that internally instead, and it becomes your burden to carry, your dysregulation to sort out. It doesn't help you answer the question of, are they being disrespectful? Because it doesn't really matter anyway, because you wouldn't do anything with that realization. So I think that that is important to point out. Now, that's not a given. I know lots of sensitive people who are like ninjas at setting boundaries and speaking up, like ninjas. They're so good. And so I think it depends a little bit on your upbringing and other things that have happened and your temperament and all of that. So, being sensitive is just one part of who you are. And so it's not like you have experienced your sensitivity exactly as I have. There are other factors always going to be impacting that. I already see in my kids like a confidence that I did not have as a child, and they're both really sensitive kids. And, I sometimes have to remind myself that, my sensitivity is not their sensitivity. And so sort of seeing how that plays out differently. So now I want to offer some perspectives from the other side. Like, what if your sensitivity is kind of contributing to this situation of feeling disrespected or misunderstood or being treated unfairly or unkindly? Because I think that does happen, right? Where perhaps we misread a situation, we assume an intent, we assume meaning when it isn't actually there. I've definitely had this happen to me, and I've certainly witnessed it in other people. And I think I would be surprised if you hadn't as well, where we kind of can watch a situation unfold and be like, wow, I think they're really misreading this, right? They seem to be taking something personally that just, there truly was no intent there. And so when this happens, when it happens to me and when I've sort of seen it unfold, I think the common denominator there is that you're already overstimulated, over-aroused, overwhelmed, outside of your window of tolerance, outside of that, perfect kind of level of arousal where you are just like able to take whatever life throws at you. And what happens when we're in that state, right, where we're kind of in this fight or flight mode, is that your nervous system is like, there is something that we need to overcome here. We need to run from something, fight something. Something is a threat. What is it? And so then we start to look for it, right? And so I think that that's a really important thing to recognize. If you've got an already overstimulated, overwhelmed nervous system, it's really easy for people to become your enemy because your brain is looking for them. Your brain is looking for like, what is the cause of this dysregulation? And if there's somebody out there that's just like doing something that you're like, oh, I don't like the way they looked at me. I don't like the thing that they just said. You may well misinterpret it based on the state of your system. And so I think that's important to point out is that, yeah, you still feel that way. That feeling is still very real. It's still very true. And you should trust that you feel that way. But you might want to get curious about why. And that, I think, is really important to understand. And so understanding your internal state, this is where it becomes really valuable to be able to access how you feel. And we can't always do that. That's one thing that I have developed a skill for over decades of working in the mindful movement field for myself and supporting other people. But it's not uncommon for people to feel very disconnected from what they're actually feeling. You know, it's interesting. If I asked you how you felt right now, I think a very large proportion of people would tell me what they think. That you would give words, which we always have to give words for feelings, but it would really be a thought more than a feeling. And so we have trouble accessing that sometimes. And to be able to increase our, what's the word? I can't think of the word. Increase our fluency. That's a good word. Fluency in that language is so important. And so this is where learning to understand ourselves, learning to be self-reflective, and not in a critical kind of way, but in a really honest way that says, yeah, I sort of can see what's going on here. I can feel what's going on. I can get in touch with kind of those inner workings. That can be really invaluable. So if we come back to the question of like, how do I know if they're being disrespectful? I think if I was to summarize everything, I've kind of summarized it into sort of 5 points. Number 1, you have to know how you feel. 2, you have to believe in the truth of how you feel, right? So taking it as information, like accurate information. I do feel how I feel. And then feeling like it's okay for you to feel like that, right? Without having to pretend otherwise. So not masking, I feel this way. I feel disrespected. I feel upset. I feel like I've been treated unfairly. But then also having the willingness, point 4, having the willingness to assess your state and be self-reflective. Because whilst your feelings are always true, we do want to be curious about where they really come from. Because I mentioned, obviously, the state of overwhelm can impact how we view things, but it's not just that, right? It's our previous experiences, our beliefs, our misconceptions about people in general. There are so many things that can contribute to how we see the world. We all wear, a different tint of glasses that is, the tint is unique to us based on all of our previous experiences, all of our beliefs, all of our tendencies, all of our traits, all of our temperamental stuff. So we're all viewing the world through a slightly different tint. And if we can become more aware of that, then that helps us with that part, right? Of being like, I am self-aware enough and reflective enough and honest enough and self-compassionate enough that I can be really honest about what's impacting me here. And then the 5th point is, if you want something to change, if you want to clarify something with someone, if you want to check on somebody's intentions, if you want to call them out, speak up, set a boundary, make a claim, then you have to be willing to do that. You have to be able to generate enough of a sense of safety in yourself to be able to say, you know what, that was really disrespectful. I feel very disrespected. They're slightly different things, right? I feel really disrespected. What was your intention? It's probably a better way to think about it. I feel really disrespected. Your intention, you've clarified. And now I need to put a boundary in place because I'm not down with this, right? So there is a lot of steps to this, I think. On that last point, for many highly sensitive people, that's scary. Setting a boundary, speaking up, making a claim. I have not done a lot of that in my life up until I was like really and truly an adult, because it was terrifying. It was terrifying. And I think a big part of it came down to really not trusting how I felt, not trusting my version of reality, not having the capacity to find enough safety in myself. I never really felt that. And so I want to point that out, that can be really hard. It might leave you kind of like shaking in terror, thinking, I can't do that part. And that's where we have to build on our skills. That is very possible. These sorts of skills are very available. They are absolutely at our disposal and we can learn them. Which is a great point for me to let you know that Soma Home is back. You might have heard me talk about this in, years gone by, but I haven't talked about it recently, I don't think. But Soma Home is coming back. Soma Home is my 8-week online program for sensitive people who are tired of feeling like they're on this emotional roller coaster. They are tired of feeling like they're on an emotional roller coaster that they can't find the control panel for, right? So they're up one minute, down the next, feeling like overwhelm is something that they just have to kind of grit their teeth and get through. And in that course, it's 8 weeks, it's really comprehensive, but I share with you how you can befriend your sensitivity. So that instead of feeling like something that kind of controls you, it's something that you can really find a lot of love for and learn how to navigate those trickier parts. Because, without a doubt, there are some tricky parts. So I wanted to let you know that that's coming. That's going to happen at the end of April in 2025. So registration's not open yet, but it will open sometime in April. And I've started an early interest waitlist for that program. Because I haven't run it for a while, I'm quite hopeful that the interest will be quite high. And so I've started that early interest waitlist so that if you're keen to do this work with me, you will get sort of first dibs to a spot. And you also get a cash money discount if you're on that list. So I think it's worth getting on there, even if you're not sure. If you add your name to the list, there's like zero obligation to actually sign up, but it will give you access to a discount that will be worth it. It's not like a $5 discount, it's a good discount. So yes, let me just plug that for a second. You can get on the list if you head to my website, ericawebb.com.au/soma-home. And I'll make sure that's in the show notes for this episode. You will also find the full rundown of price. You will find the full rundown of the discount you get if you are on the wait list. And you will find the full rundown of what the content is on that page as well. All right, I hope that answers the question that was asked around how do I know if this person's being disrespectful? Like all things, the answer is always, it depends, right? And there is nuance and there is, there's levels of nuance that I haven't even gotten into today. But I hope that is a helpful response nonetheless. Hope it gives you some food for thought and helps you to see too how this work of sort of befriending our sensitivity and being curious can kind of open us up to a whole other level of self-awareness when it's coupled with self-compassion that can be really quite transformative. So yeah, awesome. All right, that's it. I hope you have a great day, whatever's ahead of you, and I will talk to you again really soon.